There is no host or hostess today. You know about questions for me at the end. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. If you have any electronic problems, go to the chat and you'll receive some help. This is the third session of the Ulysses Grant presidency. At the end of the session, questions will be answered, and Grayson will come in and help with that. So, we've been talking about the United States Civil War and Ulysses Grant's involvement in it. And here is the next battle that we're going to talk about. Fort Henry, which lasted less than a day on 6 February of 1862, and Fort Donelson, very nearby. Troops moved over there. 5-day battle, 5 days later, February of 1862. Here is Fort Henry. Here is the Ohio River up here. And you can see it's located right on the river. It becomes the Tennessee River here. Ohio River continues off in a different direction. So we're on the Tennessee River. Fort Donelson, just a few days later, here's Fort McHenry. Fort Donelson is down here, so you can see it's very nearby, a little bit south on the river, on the Tennessee River there. These are the two battles we're talking about that occurred within less than a week of each other. This is the area shown on a larger map. And here you can see this is the state of Tennessee, and right on the border with Kentucky is where these two battles, Henry and Donelson forts, took place. Here's Missouri and Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana. So this is a battle on the western third, western fourth of Tennessee. Both forts were attacked using gunboats. Here's a picture of a Civil War gunboat. It's sort of armored and has cannons in it, and it can fight from a water area. So you send it up and down rivers. And of course, there's lots of big cities on rivers, and you're protecting your cities, and your enemy is trying to destroy your cities from the water. So naval warfare takes a big advance here. Fort Henry, it's immediately conquered. I mean, it just can't, it really isn't an armed military fort. It's a fort where they just watch the river, watch river traffic, make sure there isn't anything suspicious going on, and then get messages sent off to other areas that are better fortified. Fort Donelson has great defenses, just the opposite of Fort Henry. Strong guns. Here's a picture of it today and preserved. It has a river view and stone walls, so it can be protected against cannon fire, hopefully, although eventually cannon fire, enough of it will break down a stone wall. But here you can see a very nice big cannon aimed out at the river to try to take out any ships that are unfriendly, any gunboats, etc. Fort Donelson, Grant had 40,000 troops. That was 70% of all the troops at Fort Donelson. The Confederates had 17,500 troops. That's 30%. So the Confederates are pretty well outnumbered here at the Fort Donelson battle. As a matter of fact, they even leave the fort and say maybe we need to attack land forces coming at us from the land side, and we'll just watch the river and see what happens there. So they confront ground troops. They have a lot of trouble. They retreat back into the fort, and they eventually they have to surrender. Now we're going to take this illustration to a larger. Here you can see, here's Fort Donelson, everything that's in pink. And this says 17 heavy guns here. Remember at West Point, officers take an art class, and it's to draw maps of battles like this. And here's General Buckner. They got the names of where people are. 17,500 men. That's what the Confederacy has. Here's the river over here. And you can see here's a gunboat in the river. There's another Union gunboat in the river attacking Fort Donelson. So this is a battle map, fort in pink. Here it says water battery right there. Oops. Oh, yeah. Now, over here, this says abacus. What the heck is that? It's sharpened felled trees. So on the land side, the Confederates cut down trees and they'd sharpen one end and point those out at where they thought troops would be coming from, enemy troops. It's an Arabic word, but it's a sharpened tree defense is what it is. So these were a couple of big time victories, especially due to the fact that they were on rivers, which controls transportation of goods and soldiers and so on. So these were big victories for the North. Grant, unfortunately, never gained permission for the attacks. He never talked to generals that were serving above him in rank, didn't communicate with the higher ups here during these battles. He just said, okay, here we go. And that's considered a real difficulty. Lincoln was the commander in chief. He really liked Grant. He promoted Grant to major general. Grant would fight. These other generals were all saying, we need more forces. We need more supplies. We need a better situation here and so on. Grant, he's engaging in battles. Lincoln likes this. Lincoln wants to win the war. Here's a paperback book dealing with Grant's name. You know, his original name was Hiram Ulysses Grant, H.U. Grant. And a congressman, when he offered Grant a trip to West Point for a 4-year education, said, we ought to make your name more patriotic. And so he called him Ulysses S. Grant, so his initials would be U.S. Talked about this before. Well, he was United States Grant. That's what it sounded like. And now here's a book comes out, Unconditional Surrender Grant, still U.S. Grant. Available through Amazon, $12.60 if you're interested in a short Grant biography. Civil War, Battle of Shiloh. This is a biggie. Shiloh was on 6 and 7 April of 1862 in the state of Tennessee. It's also known as, that's what this AKA means, the Battle of Pittsburg Landing. Here is Shiloh. This is a river, not a border. And this is Tennessee, so you can see it's in that eastern the far western part of Tennessee, and it's down on this river area right here. And notice how close it is to Nashville, which is another big site for Northern conquest, or that they want to take care of it. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. This is the state of Arkansas. Tennessee, here's Mississippi and Alabama, Kentucky to the north. Nashville was very vital, and the Battle of Shiloh was on the way to Nashville. 5 reasons why Nashville was vital to Union conquest and why it was vital to Southern survival. A lot of iron manufacturing occurred in Nashville. And the iron, you could make cannonballs with it, but generally it was the sword making. Swords were issued to officers, and it was a sword making capital of the South. And there's a portion of a sword from the Civil War period. It's also surrounded, Nashville is, by a large agricultural area. If you can capture it, you're going to stop the distribution of food, a lot of food, to Confederate forces. Here's a picture of a field. You capture it, you hold it, your enemy doesn't get it. Now, this isn't an old Civil War picture. I mean, see the pickup truck out here, but anyhow, it's agricultural. Item 3 of 5, railroads converge in Nashville. Uh, Railroads usually had central stations. They'd go in there for repairs, and that's where the populations were. They'd take passengers to different places. They'd take goods into smaller areas from these larger cities. So railroads converge in Nashville, making it a very important place for distribution, which the Union would like to stop. Item 4 of 5, big manufacturing area. We already talked about iron. Well, gunpowder was made there also, vital for a civil war or a war of any kind. So gunpowder manufacturing, if you can cut that off by the North conquering Nashville, you're going to affect the amount of weaponry that the South, the Confederacy, has. And item 5 of 5, lots of supplies are stockpiled there and then distributed on those railroads that converge there out to troops and individuals and military war effort, etc. So lots of supplies. Let's take a quick look at what we just talked about. Nashville was important to conquer. Iron manufacturing here. It is surrounded by agricultural areas. If you can conquer Nashville, you can wipe out a lot of food for the citizens and the soldiers. Railroads converge there. It's a major distribution area. You can stop that by conquering the city. Gunpowder manufacturing and lots of supplies stockpiled there. So huge, vital area to a war effort. Conquer it, and you've done the enemy a lot of damage. Grant held off attacking. He was concerned that he didn't have enough troops, so he was waiting for more troops. Well, while he's waiting, the Confederates attack, and they gain a lot of ground around Nashville that or around Shiloh that the Union had already conquered. So and there's lots of Union prisoners are taken also. Here's a photo of Shiloh battle. Uh, I always like to tell people we tend to look at a photo and we see it in totality. Let's look at parts of it here. Did you notice U.S. Grant on a horse in that drawing that we have here, or photo? This is a drawing, but this lesson applies to everything. Here's a close-up of Grant there. Notice that a bomb went off up here. Here's a guy running away toward us, but these people up here are all facing in a different direction. Here's a horse that's down. Here's a tree that's down. Here's a rifle on the ground. Here's a soldier on the ground. So, in addition to looking at a photo or a painting in its totality, also look at parts. You can look at it in fourths or or smaller portions or thirds running this way, you know. Um, Anyhow, how to look at an image. Union reinforcements arrive for Grant. He's ready to attack. The battle then is won by the Union. And we're going to take a look at a chart again here with casualty totals on it. First, total troops. The Union had 66,000. That was almost 60% of the total troops at the Battle of Shiloh. The Confederacy had 45,000. That was about 40%. So this was a 60-40 battle with Union supremacy. 111 forces roughly in total. Killed 1754, 2.6% of Union troops were killed in this battle. 1728, 3.8% of Confederate troops killed. Total in the battle, 3482, 3.1%. Wounded, 8,408 Union troops, nearly 13%. Just over 8,000 Confederate troops, almost 18%. And the total in the battle of about 16,500, 14, almost 15% of the total troops were killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Okay, captured or missing, almost 2,900 of the Union troops, 4.4%. Confederacy, 959 captured or missing, 2.1%. Total, 3,844 captured or missing soldiers, 3.5%. Let's take a look at total casualties here. For the Union, 13,000 of 66,000 troops. That's almost 20%. 1 in every 5 soldiers killed, wounded, captured, or missing. The Confederacy has 10,700 roughly troops that are killed, wounded, captured, or missing. That's almost 24%, a fourth almost of all the Confederate troops, 1 in every 4 individuals. Totals here, 111,000 troops total on both sides, counting both sides. 3,482 people killed, 3.1%. Wounded, 16,420, almost 15%. Captured or missing, 3,844, 3.5%. These totals for the just the bottom 3 here, the casualties, 23,764, 21.4%. Total casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. This is more casualties, 23,746, than in any other event in U.S. history up to 1862. So this was something that took more lives than any other event in the first roughly 80 years when the U.S. was a country. Really changed this Battle of Shiloh due to the amount of deaths and damage done and injuries and so on. Really changed how a lot of people in the United States looked at death, because you had a lot of people, you know, there were people in the military 14 years old. There were plenty that were 16 to 30-year-olds dying in massive numbers when the life expectancy was 40 years. This was a lot of young people dying. This started to make people take a look at death and what death is, and started a change in how citizens in the U.S. looked at death. Shiloh, let's take a look at the word. It's a Hebrew word, a Jewish word, meaning place of peace. And there's a church nearby, because it's a biblical word also. So the church is called Shiloh, and the battle is named for the church. The nearby town is Pittsburgh Landing. Usually we have battles and they're named for a nearby town or the area that it's in. But in this case, it's named for a church that is nearby. Grant continued moving eastward. Now, here's Shiloh on this arrow. Here is Savannah, Georgia, at this star. And after Shiloh, located here, Grant moves a few miles and he's at Savannah, Georgia. So he's moving eastward through Tennessee along the border of with Mississippi. And, well, Grant got a lot of criticism for these battles, this Battle of Shiloh in particular. Casualty rate was very high. There were a total of 80,000 troops in Tennessee. They didn't all take part in the battle, but statewide, in minor confrontations and larger battles, there were a total of 24,000 casualties statewide. These are deaths, injuries, captures, killed, wounded, etc. That's 30% of all the troops. Gigantic number of military losses. During World War II, we had 80 million people that died, approximately. Some people say 70, some say 85 million. I'm going to say 80 million. That's about 3% of the world population. Now, here in this first battle, we get about 30% of the casualties in the state of Tennessee among troops. So let's take a closer look at this. World War II, 80 million dead. World population's 2.3 billion. That's 3.5% dead of the world population. But this was a world war. It was taking place in Asia, in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in Europe, in North Africa. So we count the entire world population, 2.3 billion people, and 80 million killed. That's a 3.5% death rate. In the Civil War, there were 700,000 killed. That's just within the United States now, is the battle area. U.S. population was 31.4 million. That's 2.2% of the U.S. population is dead. So by comparison, you got 3.5% world population in World War II killed, 2.2% in the United States Civil War. 2.2% is still considered pretty high, even though the rate of death was much higher during World War II. But weaponry was a whole lot different too. They had airplanes during World War II and they bombed cities and civilian areas. Grant received a great deal of criticism for these battles, is what we were talking about. First one was casualties. Second one, charged with drinking too much alcohol. A lot of people were starting to say they thought he was an alcoholic. However, other people wrote in their diaries or wrote in their military records that we never saw any of this. Didn't see Grant drinking at all, ever. So we don't know why other people are saying it. Grant considered resigning from the military because of these rumors that were floating about his alcohol consumption. Fellow officers talked him out of it. They said, hey, don't do that. No, you're too important. This is too big a deal going on right now. And Lincoln, in response to these rumors or facts, whatever they were, sided with Grant and promoted him. Well, the Battle of Iuka, which is in the state of Mississippi, 19 September 1862. It's in the very far northeast corner of the state of Mississippi. Here is where this Battle of Iuka took place. And that's the easternmost side of the Western Campaign. Last week, we talked about how the Eastern campaign in the United States during the Civil War is the one we tend to remember. The burning of Atlanta and Sherman's march to the sea, the Battle of Gettysburg, etc. That's not where Grant was. He was in the Western section. And this border right here, this eastern border of Mississippi, is where the Western section begins. So, Western section historically has kind of been denied. I mean, historians know lots about it, they've written books about it. But among the general public, this area where Grant was located in the West it's kind of been forgotten. You know, why do some areas and some people get remembered and others don't? And there's historians have written about this. One of the most interesting books on this topic that I read years ago states that you need someone promoting you or your area. And there's been lots of promotion historically of the Eastern campaign during the Civil War. Why do we remember General George Armstrong or General George Custer? There were lots of other generals that did lots of great stuff after the Civil War. Custer was just one of them. Why do we remember him? His wife outlived him by decades. She got historians to write about him, got him remembered, and he had an advocate. So if you have somebody writing about you, if you have an advocate for what you did, you tend to get remembered. Gettysburg gets remembered, Shiloh doesn't. Total losses, Battle of Iuka. Oh no, not another chart. Very small forces at this battle, just 4,500 Union, 3,179 for the Confederacy. 3.2% of the Union lost, 8.3%, 2.5 times as many Confederate troops killed as Union troops. And here, wounded, 1.5 times as many people wounded in this battle in the Confederacy. A lot of people are worried about Grant having too many losses in his battles. The Confederacy has even greater losses generally. Captured or missing, just 40 Union troops, 0.8%. 562 Confederate troops missing, 17.6%. There's some controversy about how many troops were actually killed, wounded, or captured in the Confederacy. Some people say it's 700. Others say we did a very accurate count. It's 1,516. So it could be as low as 22%, could be as high as 47.7%. So lots of losses among the Confederates. Iuka, Mississippi, again, here's a map, bigger. You can see where it's located. It's a Confederate supply depot, and that's why it's of strategic importance. It's got lots of goods there, weaponry and ammunition and food supplies and horses and so on. This battle is won by the Union. And again, it's a small battle. It's not 111,000 troops like Shiloh was. It's just 8,000 troops. Civil War, Siege of Vicksburg. This is a major battle in the Western campaign, overseen by Ulysses Grant. Went from 18 May to 4 July, a lengthy battle. But it's not called a battle, it's called a siege. So let's take a look here and we'll talk about a siege in a few minutes. Mississippi River, vital to transportation. It sails down here through Louisiana and into the Gulf of Mexico, begins up in Minnesota, sails all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Make that the Gulf of America if you're a Trumpite. Well, you can spell it different. The maps are still calling it Mexico. You can see here, Vicksburg is about a third of the way up the Mississippi River in the state of Mississippi. It can block lots of traffic trying to get through and head further north and get supplies into the Union. So the Confederacy wants to stop any Union activity along the Mississippi River. And this is the great battle of the Western campaign, like Gettysburg was the great battle of the Eastern campaign. Kind of funny here. When I typed in Trumpite in order to make sure I was spelling it right, I got a correction. But if you're a Trumpite, call it the Gulf of America. Do you mean termite? And I also got, do you mean trumpet? Siege defined. You surround a city. You prevent supplies from getting into it. You prevent people from getting out of it. No supplies, no food. You starve them out. You wait 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. This was common practice in the Middle Ages. You just surround a city area and you starve it out. Don't let anybody in, don't let anybody out. This is still a strategy now during the United States Civil War in May of 1863. Now, here's Grant's name up here. This is Sherman. That's William Tecumseh Sherman, famous general. Tecumseh, his middle name is Tecumseh, was a very famous Native American chief, and lots of white folks would include the name and the names of their male heirs. And Sherman was one of those people. His parents named him William Tecumseh Sherman. You can see he's in the north here. All these blue markers are Union troops. All these red markers along this line here, those are Confederate troops. Now, here you've got Blair, Tuttle, Logan, people we've never heard of, And you've got Grant here. Here's McPherson. Here's McClernand. These are all generals. And you can see what they've done is place troops to the north of the city and to the east of the city. To the south of the city here, nothing. And here's the Mississippi River. And Grant will bring gunboats in there. This was a 48-day campaign if you count the day of surrender. It's 47 days of battle. So it lasted 6 weeks, 5 days, almost 7 weeks. Excuse me. Ended on the 4th of July of 1863. What a date. Now, interestingly enough, this battle was fought at the same time as the Battle of Gettysburg, which had ended the day before on July 3rd. Now, because it ended the day before, newspapers all across the country were reporting on the great battle and the win at Gettysburg. The next day, there's another big win in the Western campaign, but everybody is now swallowing up the Battle of Gettysburg, not the siege of Vicksburg. 2 goals at this siege: open the Mississippi River to Union forces, Union traffic, Northerners from the Gulf of Mexico northward. Here's the Mississippi River from Minnesota all the way down. You can go visit the origin of the Mississippi River here in Minnesota, and you can actually walk across. I mean, it's hardly wide. They got stones in there, so you can walk across where the origin of the Mississippi River is. And here's a picture of it on a larger map. Vicksburg is way down here. You can see if it can stop traffic up the Mississippi River, it's stopping traffic up into the north, into Illinois, and then you can push your supplies and so on to other areas. So anyhow, long river there. Uh, Interesting thing about the Mississippi River, it travels all this distance. They say by the time the Mississippi River gets from northern Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico, it has passed through 7 bodies. Ouch. I'm glad we're drinking water up here in St. Paul, not down in Vicksburg. Item 2, split the Confederacy into 2 sections. You got 3 Confederate states over here in the West, and you got like 10 over here in the East. You conquer the Mississippi River, like by winning the Battle of Gettysburg. You've split the South in half. You've split your enemy. They can't communicate well. They can't send things back and forth well. So you're splitting them up. Now, whoops. Yeah, I got lost. There we go. So, yeah, you split the Confederacy in two. Remember Sherman? Sherman was up in this battle up here, and that led to his march across the South this way, cutting the South again in half in this direction. Of course, we're talking about Grant here, so that's that's why I've got this on the map. But Sherman's famous march to the sea, the burning down of total of the city of Atlanta, and then getting to the Atlantic Ocean, also split the South, now split into thirds. So here's a map of Vicksburg again. And this shows, this is all land side stuff. Here's the riverside. So Vicksburg, last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, by conquering Vicksburg, it's quite a accomplishment, and the river is open to the north. It's just a huge gain. So, and we've talked about Sherman already. He's attacking from the north, Grant from the east, McClellan from the kind of the south and east there. Here's the city of Vicksburg, actually sits here, surrounding areas. And here's a ferry boat out to DeSoto, or the island here, Vicksburg Island. Sherman attacked by Confederate forces. He was in the north, remember? He could not advance. It's up to Grant to continue the blockade and try to advance. Grant changed his military strategy here. Supplies. Okay, you take food along so the soldiers have something to eat. Instead, let's eat off land as we conquer it. So there's farmland. They've got food growing in there. We'll eat that, and we don't have to worry about hoping that there are enough supplies, meat and grains and so forth. And we may not need supply forces. Those are more forces that can then be added to the battle. So instead of taking supplies with you, pick them up along the way, especially agricultural. This was Napoleon that invented this strategy when he was heading into Russia, hundreds of miles from France up to Moscow. How are we going to maintain supplies and supply routes? And Napoleon said, let's just live off their land. The Russians pretty soon said, they're able to advance because of our agriculture here now. It's in the fall of the year. So let's burn all our crops. Then as they advance, they're not going to have any food. And that's why Napoleon really didn't win I mean, he conquered Moscow, but he ended up coming back right away. It just didn't really have anything he could do there. Historians are surveyed. Who are the greatest military minds in the history of the world? Number one ranking has almost always gone to Napoleon Bonaparte. Slaves escaped from their owners in the state of Mississippi. We don't want to be slaves anymore. Mississippi was a tough place. It was far south, making it very difficult to escape from. You had to pass through a couple more uh, chains of slave states in order to get into the north. So these slaves, now there's U.S. Northern troops fighting in their area. So they run to the troops, offer their services to Grant and his army in this Western theater, and ask for and hope for their freedom as a result. Grant says to keep them free, we got to move them north. He moves them up to Cairo, Illinois, which is in the southern part of Illinois. And it's decided that if they were moved up to Chicago, they would be of better service there. They would be safer further north. So they moved to Chicago, and people hired them as servants. So they work mostly for people of wealth, and they find other jobs. So lots of slaves escape slavery and move into freedom as a result of Grant's campaigns here in the Western Theater. Grant does keep many in the South. He says you could still pick cotton as you've been doing, but the proceeds from that will go to the North and will help us win the war. Well, that made sense. So many of the slaves looking for freedom said, yeah, okay, we'll enrich the North if possible. Escaped slaves were also used at the Battle of Gettysburg, where they built a canal. Now, here's the Mississippi River, and it's got a big horseshoe bend in it right here at Vicksburg. See, here's Vicksburg. Well, we don't want to have to sail past Vicksburg. We don't want to have to sail all this distance around this horseshoe. So escaped slaves were used to build this canal. Here's a close-up of it. Build this canal across here. You go just 10 miles instead of 70 miles or whatever it is. I'm making that up, but it's a much shorter distance to keep you on the Mississippi River. So Grant's not just a field commander. He decides he's going to look into some other things. There's a lot of Northerners coming down into this Western theater and into the southern area there, and they're picking cotton illegally, and they trade it them. They sell it like to Britain, get a lot of money for it. Grant says, I'm not just in the military. I got to do something about these Northerners that are illegally confiscating crops in the South in conquered areas. So he limits cotton purchases that can be made by Northerners. You know, you can only buy 5% of a crop. You can't come in and take 40% of it and carry it out. And in order to do that, he required that Northern business people have permits. And there were two permit issuers, two sets of permits that you needed if you were a Northerner wanting to do business in Southern conquered areas. One was from the Treasury Department, and one was from the United States military. Grant also kept civilians from interfering in the war effort. A lot of them were businesses, Northerners. They wanted big profits. My opinion down here, and the opinion of many, is that really the role of the military budget is for excessive profits for American businesses. Donald Trump has just requested a 44% increase in the military budget to $1.5 trillion. Take a look at goods that are manufactured with military contracts, and the cost of them is extremely higher than the same good manufactured for civilian goods. And anyway, Grant's concerned about this and about businesses making profits off of agriculture and off of military goods and so on. So that's an issue 160 years ago. Treatment of Jews during the Vicksburg siege. Grant issued an order. He expelled all Jews from territory he was in charge of militarily. That means, yep, it was smaller areas, but it grew as he advanced in rank. So this is becomes very controversial. Jewish expulsion from areas that Grant controls in the military. 2 weeks later, Lincoln ends up hearing about this, doesn't like it, cancels the order against the Jews that Grant had made. Later in life, Grant spoke about this, stating that it was a major mistake on his part. Major strategies of Grant in the Vicksburg attack. There are three. Created small attacks. This drew Confederates away from Vicksburg. So you'd have just a few forces start a little confrontation. And the Confederates would then move toward it. And they'd move away from Union forces at Gettysburg, who could then move in closer to the city. Another major strategy of Grant's at Vicksburg was to attack through swampy areas. Vicksburg is on a river, and there's a lot of wetlands all around that area. And let's attack through the wetland, because anybody that knows anything militarily knows that no idiot would attack through a wetland. Slower moving, more difficult for troops. You can't get supplies through there. There aren't any roads, etc. It's a wetland. So he fooled the Confederates by moving troops through these wetlands, and that caused them then to have to move their forces also. The third of these three is called for and had gunboats brought up the Mississippi River to Vicksburg for battles. Here are very large gunboats. Here are some smaller gunboats. So you bring these gunboats up. Grant and his forces with Sherman and others are attacking from the land side. Now Grant says, let's attack from the riverside also. Fortunately, the North forces have manufactured gunboats, and they are sent up the Mississippi River to aid in the Battle of Vicksburg from the water side. So you got water campaign and you got land campaign. Okay, after the siege of Vicksburg, Grant accepted radical Republican positions, win the war, abolish slavery. So he sided with this group that were known as radical Republicans in the Congress because they just wanted a big win in this war, stop it, don't allow the Confederacy to stand alone on its own and everything comes to an end and there's peace. No, we're going to win. These guys are coming back into the Union and we're going to abolish slavery. The leader of the radical Republicans and of these efforts to win the war and abolish slavery in Congress, Thaddeus Stevens, pictured here. This guy should be known as well as Lincoln for ending slavery. Lincoln said the purpose of the Civil War is to preserve the Union. Thaddeus Stevens said it's to abolish slavery. Grant was offered to move from the Western Theater to the Eastern Theater. You're doing such a good job over there, but the Eastern Theater is really where the big action is, so we want you over into the Eastern Theater. And he said, no thanks. Told Lincoln, no, I'm not moving. Had two reasons. So I know the area in the West. I'm familiar with it. I've been here for 3 years. I should be allowed to stay in an area where I have some expertise. Second, I don't want difficulties in the Eastern Command. You move somebody from the West into the East, and what's he doing here? Why did he get moved here? We were doing okay here ourselves, etc. Grant promotion. Lincoln gave Grant control of all Union forces. Only one other general has ever had such authority in the United States. There's been two generals that had control of all United States forces. The other one, George Washington. Battle of Chattanooga. This is in Tennessee. It's on the 25th of November, 1863. And it's also known as the Battle of Missionary Ridge or the Battle of Chattanooga because it's fought on a hillside. Look at this hill here, see, with a dramatic drop down to plains area. And it was a defeat for the Confederacy again. William Sherman made advances here, but he was stopped by Confederates. And victory by the North. From this area, Sherman marched eastward, and that was his famous march to the sea. Grant and General Thomas were in the mid area here attacking Chattanooga, and General Hooker was in the south. General Thomas, floor of the valley, the central forces. This is where most of the infantry is stationed, developed. He got, General Thomas got the rifle pits that had been dug all along here by the Confederacy. He got them taken over, and the Confederates then had very few places to hide. As a result, they were worried about even hiding in what remaining excuse me, what remaining pits they had left, so they just abandoned the whole thing. This made the use of rifles more difficult. You're having to stand out in the open to use your rifle. You're not buried in the ground, standing just shoulder high for visibility and so on. Joseph Hooker forces, the right wing of the battle down there. Let's look at a word origin again. I love these things. There was a general whose troops had a lot of prostitutes accompanying them. The general welcomed them in. He thought it was a good thing for the troops. Prostitutes came to be called hookers because it was General Joseph Hooker that was allowing this. The Overland Campaign. This was May 4th to June 24th, 1864. So a long battle. But it was long because Richmond, Virginia is the capital city of the South. And we're getting near the end of the war. There's lots of worries in the South about losing. And notice, it's not called the Overland Battle. It's called the Overland Campaign, also called the Wilderness Battle. Well, what the heck is a campaign? A campaign is a whole series of battles. Here is Richmond, Virginia. Look at all these little sites around here, all these dark spots. These are battles. So you got 20 battles going on around a city. All of a sudden, what do you call it? It's a campaign. It's bigger than a battle. So battles, campaigns, incidences, etc. Excuse me, time for a drink. Campaigns around Richmond. There was the Valley Campaign, which was a series of battles, the North Virginia Campaign, the Maryland Campaign, the Gettysburg Campaign, the Overland Campaign, which we're going to concentrate on, and the Valley Campaigns. of 1864. So you get a lot of little campaigns with 5 battles in them, and then a huge campaign that includes all these smaller campaigns, etc. Leading generals in the Overland Campaign, of course, were the famous generals from the Civil War. Robert E. Lee, Confederate, on the left. Ulysses Grant, the Union general, on your right. 1 month, 2 weeks, and 6 days. And here on a calendar, I've drawn lines through how long this battle lasted. Almost 7 weeks. Again, it was the capital city of the South. You're going to do more to defend it than usual. Oh no, another chart. Research has been done in education, and when you show charts, people hate it. They are more difficult things to look at and to have to understand. But anyway, casualties were enormous here. Let's take a look. 119,000 Union forces at the Battle of Richmond, Virginia, 63,000 Confederate forces. Almost 2/3 of all the troops were Union, 1/3 were Confederate. Killed 6.4% and 6.7%. These are high. Usually it was 3% or so. Wounded, 119,000. There were 38,000 wounded Union. That's 1/3 of all the Union forces in this battle. Again, it's our capital city. Everybody's fighting harder. In the Confederacy, 18,600 casualties, 30%. 1/3 of all the casualties were people that were wounded. 1/3 of all the troops involved in this battle. It's just gigantic. Captured or missing, almost 9,000 Union forces, 7.5%. 9,700 Confederate forces, over 15%. Here, casualties, killed, wounded, captured, and missing, 54,926 Union forces, that's 46.1%. Gigantic number. 32,500 casualties, killed, wounded, captured, or missing. That's more than half, 51.6% of the Confederate forces. These battles in the Overland Campaign were won by the North. Grant attacked several different areas all around Richmond, Virginia. His goal was, here are Confederate forces, here are Union forces. You try to break through. You open up a section of the line of the Confederate forces. Your troops break through, then they can turn around and come back behind your enemy forces, and you're now able to shoot at them from behind or keep them away from retreating, etc. If you capture them, so on. And this was part of Grant's strategy at Richmond, Virginia. Final battle of the Overland Campaign was at Cold Harbor. Many of you may have heard of that battle. It's eventually, to the Confederacy's total defeat, the war is over. Here are Union forces. Look at them. Far more Union forces than there are Confederate forces in the red over here. Let's take a look at the names of some of these people. I mean, we've never heard of them. You know, Smith. These are Union generals. Edmund, Brooks, Stannard, Russell, Gibbon, Wright, Hancock, McDougal. Anyhow, lots of guys, lots to learn about the Civil War. I once spoke to a group, and a lot of people who were Civil War reenactors were in probably 1/3 of the audience. Holy mackerel. The stuff they know. I will never speak to a group of reenactors again. It's just, it's embarrassing. But anyway, or else I better learn more. But, these people concentrate on a single situation and really know a great deal about it. Lee surrenders. This is April 2nd of 1865, a date that will live in infamy. That's the opposite of infamy, because it's the date the South surrendered. Grant does a huge assault on Richmond, Tennessee. Again, it's the Confederate capital. Robert E. Lee's unable to defend it. He doesn't, he can't. Confederate forces are spread out all over. He doesn't have the transportation empire that the Confederacy previously had. He can't move the troops well. He can't get them into the area where they're needed. The Confederacy loses the Battle of Richmond, which is really the loss of the Civil War. Here they are meeting together. This is a drawing. This is a photograph. Grant and Lee, they meet at Appomattox Courthouse. Now, everybody you talk to says, oh, well, they met at this courthouse and did the surrender there. It's not a courthouse. It's a town name. Appomattox Courthouse is a city, and they met in one of the buildings in the city. So it's a town name, not a building. Grant on Lee. He fought for a cause he saw as noble, but was one of the most horrible causes in history. Grant's talking about slavery here. And other countries in Europe had abolished slavery, 50 years earlier than we did. So this is a big deal. The United States was kind of the holdouts here, although there were places that continued slavery. Terms of surrender, April 2nd, 1865. There are 3 items here. All Confederate soldiers are paroled. They won't be charged with any crimes. They're free to go home. But they have to turn in their weapons, any weapons they have, knives, swords. The soldiers probably don't have. Those were things that officers had. And if you rebel again, we will prosecute you. You'll be tried, prosecuted, found guilty, and you'll be in front of a firing squad, or you'll be hung by a rope. So, number 1 of 3, Confederate soldiers paroled, as long as there's no further action. All the Confederates may return home, and we'll take them home using federal or northern facilities, in particular, water vessels, such as pictured here, a big boat. You get on board, we'll take you back to the South. Or railroads. We'll put you on a train and you can get yourself back home again. Oftentimes they'd get dropped off and they might be 20 miles from home. Lots of soldiers walking the roads in the South, lots of people attempting to feed them if they had food. And of course, the arrival home then is totally unexpected. You don't know if the person's coming back or not. And it's taken 2 months after the war is over and so forth. Item 3 of the 3, all Confederate officers may keep their sidearms. A sidearm is a revolver. So Confederate officers get to keep their 6-shooters. Further orders that came down, all Confederate troops can keep their horses. Of course, infantry doesn't have horses. Those are guys on foot. Cavalry has horses, and they're considered higher up in the realm of Army prodigy here. So at any rate, the cavalry would have horses, officers would have horses, So you get to keep your horses. Second further order, Grant ordered all Union troops to stop celebrating the war's end. Everybody was getting drunk. They were all having a big time, reveling in the cities near where they were stationed. And he said, this has become riotous. We need to slow you down, settle you down, relax. South is part of the Union again. The war is over. Now, I got about 10 minutes left, and I'm going to start talking about the Lincoln assassination, which came very soon after the Civil War ended. And of course, this isn't really about Lincoln, it's about Grant's role and his association with Lincoln at the time of the assassination. Grant was invited to attend a cabinet meeting, and that was a big deal. I mean, he comes in and people are clapping. Lincoln's cabinet of, I think it was 6 members at the time, and they're celebrating Grant, and they sit and have a meeting, and Grant gets to observe it. And at that meeting, Lincoln says, hey, my wife and I are going to a play tonight at Ford's Theater. Why don't you and your wife join us? And the play is The American Cousin. Here's a modern day picture of Ford's Theater. I've been there. My wife and I went there, and I told them I was in the Peterson house across the street where Lincoln died. And I was familiar with the famous poem, When Last in the Courtyard Lilacs Bloomed, by Walt Whitman. He was a big Lincoln was a big superhero to Whitman. And so I see a side door in the Peterson house. I start to walk out to it, and the guide said, oh, you can't go out there. And I said, oh, I just wanted to see if there were lilacs out there from the Whitman poem. He said, you know about that? I said, yeah. He said, wow, yeah, no. He says, as a matter of fact, they'd been gone. And he said, I got them replanted. And after the tour of the Peterson house was over, Ford's Theater was closed. I said, that's too bad about Ford's Theater being closed. I was hoping to go in there. Said, come on, I'll take you. So he takes me and my wife over there, and we get to see where Lincoln was shot. And we're up on the second floor in the balcony area, and some woman starts yelling, you can't bring people in here. George, get them out of here. So then we left. But anyway, got into Ford's Theater, so that was nice. Grant declined the invitation. He said to Ford's Theater for the play that evening when it was offered to him at a cabinet meeting in the afternoon. Grant said, my wife and I are going up to our cabin. I've got it in quote marks here. We're going up to our cabin on the New Jersey shore. This is a cabin, 3 stories, 4 stories, actually. I mean, look up here, And look at the balconies and this thing. It's not what I'd call a cabin, but anyhow, he didn't go. Now, what was the real reason Grant declined? The real reason was Mrs. Lincoln was a big time turd, a very difficult person. People didn't like getting together with him. But Grant's wife said, no way. Thanks for rejecting that. So Grant didn't want to be near her. And other people, famous people, declined and ended up, Lincoln invited a lower ranking officer and his fiance, who were unknown, and they didn't know about Mrs. Grant and so on. And they were with the Lincolns on the night of the assassination. But Grant had been invited and stayed away. Lincoln assassination occurred on Good Friday, the Christian holiday. Okay, Grant, after the Civil War, 1865 to 69, for 4 years, he remains as a commanding general in the United States military, with the war having ended. Three major concerns. The French have moved into Mexico. Now, in the War of 1845, we took 55% of all Mexico's land. It included most of the states from California over to Texas, this whole big area that was be up in here. Now, the United States goes to war in 1861. And France goes, they wouldn't be able to defend Mexico if we moved in there. You know, you would, if you want something, go get it when the person that might attack you is involved with something else. So perfect time to invade Mexico, and that's what the French do. Second item, readmission of southern states is a big issue during this 1865 to 69 period when Grant is still in the military. And Grant says we need troops all over the South. Every single town in the South with 20,000 residents or more had large numbers of Northern troops stationed in them, with one guy at least standing at the intersection of each street of the streets in these towns. They were there to prevent a second possible uprising. Third, Native American wars had begun raging during the Civil War out in the West. As a matter of fact, here in Minnesota was kind of the beginning of the Native American wars at New Ulm, Minnesota, 1863. And it was Sioux Indians. Now, Sioux is the name the French gave them. They called themselves Dakota. Most famous battles during this 30-year period of the Native American wars was Little Bighorn, where Custer got his name, and the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890 that sort of ended all these battles. So Grant's major things that he was looking at here during this period after the Civil War, the French are in Mexico. Southern states have been readmitted to the Union. We got troops down there, so they can't rise again. And now we got wars out west with Native Americans. Then next thing we're going to talk about is charges against the Confederates. I'm wondering if we have any questions at this time yet, or should I talk for 5 more minutes?
Yeah, let's go 5 more minutes. We've got 2 questions right now. So if you have a question, place it in the Q&A, and JB, you can
Okay, thanks. I'll give you a shout. Charges against Confederates. Andrew Johnson was president of the United States. He wanted all Confederate generals brought to trial, charged, tried, found guilty, and capital punishment brought against them, or at least long prison sentence. They were to be charged with treason. That was his position. Grant's position, leave the Confederate generals alone. You know, he was a general himself. He's, well, let's leave those guys alone. And he said, I agreed, meaning Grant. He said, Grant is saying, I agreed to these Confederate generals being left alone at the Appomattox surrender. So it was part of the deal that got made. Please don't attempt to break that. It's going to be a huge violation, and the South may rise again. What actually happened? Lee was left alone, lived out his life, died in his bed. No charge was brought against him. Many generals moved to England, many Confederate generals, and lived out their lives there, worried that if they stayed in the United States, they would have capital punishment or long prison term against them. What actually happened? There were a couple of incidences. This is General George Pickett. super famous for Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg, Confederate general. And this charge that he made at the Battle of Gettysburg ended up with a lot of troop deaths, but 22 Union officers were killed as a result of that charge. He was brought to trial, he was found guilty, and he was killed by a firing squad after the war. This is William T. Andersen. Now, the Confederacy had a lot of private armies that were fighting with them. These are what are called guerrilla fighters. You know, they're not associated with a governmental group. So he wasn't associated with the South, as Andersen wasn't, but he fought for the South. And before the war was over, he got tracked down in 1864 and was killed. Reconstruction. Reconstruction is what was going on after the Civil War concerning slaves and freed slaves. How do we reconstruct people back into freedom? And there's several slides here. I'll do a few of them and maybe start over again next week at this spot. Reconstruction, Andrew Johnson's position, he had three different attitudes or ideas. The Confederates get to return to the United States Congress. Any Confederate who was serving in the Congress in 1860, then the war starts, and they go back home to the Confederacy, to the South. Now they get to return to Congress in 1865. And this is a picture of the Capitol building today. This is the Capitol building at the end of the Civil War. These large sections on each side of the Capitol building were added later. They were added in the early 1900s. One of them is the U.S. Senate. The other is the House of Representatives. So these Civil War soldiers were returning from the South, were returning to this building, and they met under the dome here. And this is the dome today. You can see there's a big change there, as there is in the stairway and so on. Johnson, second thing he supported, return white folks to government positions in the South. I mean, there weren't any black people in government positions. They were slaves. So let's get all these Southerners back into the jobs that they had before the Civil War. And blacks should only be given second-class citizenship. No, they can't vote. No, they can't own land. Things like that. This is a picture of Rosa Parks, 1950s. Refused to give up her bus seat to a white person. And this is 90 years after the Civil War has ended. She says, I'm tired of being treated like a second-class citizen. So Johnson really won this second-class citizen battle. Literacy tests, all sorts of tests given to black people, but not white people, prevented them from voting, etc. Ku Klux Klan and other such groups shutting them down. Reconstruction. Ulysses Grant positions. 4. Southerners. They're not ready to rule themselves. You don't put them back into the governmental structures of their states. They don't bring them back to the U.S. Congress. The South needs Union government protection. We're going to move down there and show them how to do it. Return former Confederates to Congress. Okay, I agree with that. They need representation. At this point, there isn't time for elections. We'll have them again in 1968, etc. blacks should be granted full citizenship. This is in direct contradiction to what Johnson wanted. No, hey, no citizenship rights for blacks. Grant says yes. How are we doing now for questions? Or
We've got a few, and I think maybe we can take these two and see if any come in, and then from there we can end early if we need to. So let me stop here sharing.
uh, okay.
All right. So the first question that we have is asking what allowed Grant to excel so well with his troops. What are some of those characteristics?
Uh, well, I think it was his willingness to fight, and that's what Lincoln liked about him. A lot of generals in the Civil War in the North didn't want to go into battle. They said, I don't have enough troops. I don't have enough supplies. I don't have enough weapons. I don't have enough food, etc. We need to wait till we're really ready to win this. And they didn't feel that. Grant was in opposition to that. Grant said, I'm attacking. And he did. And he won battles. And that Western campaign, I mean, we took over the Mississippi River, etc. And even more, and then led to Sherman's march through the South and dividing the South into thirds and all those things Lincoln liked. This guy's winning battles. He's winning the Civil War for us. What's wrong with the rest of you? End.
And this comment in the chat actually kind of talks more about Grant's character as well. And it says, when Robert E. Lee surrendered, he told Grant that his troops were starving and asked Grant to provide food for his troops. Grant agreed without hesitation, not even asking how many needed food, showing the economic power of the North.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, the war is over now. We're going to treat you well and we want you back. So they didn't starve them to death.
And then we have one submission in the Q&A that is a book suggestion actually about more northeastern Mississippi history and related to further civil rights issues, and it's called The Barn, and it's by Wright Thompson, and it looks like it discusses the 1955 murder of Emmett Till and some of the um, issues and lead up into that.
Hmm. Sure, that finally led, 90 to 100 years later, the beginning of much more full rights for people descended from slavery.
So if there are any more questions, please submit them to the Q&A. In the meantime, JB, if you want to maybe tell the roadmap ahead for Ulysses Grant, some of the big sections that we'll cover in the remaining sessions of this series.
Well, Reconstruction is going to be I think it's 37 slides, and we've covered maybe a third of them. And then we're going to talk about how under Reconstruction, there was a command of the Army Act and what that was about. There was a Tenure of Office Act where, and what's really amazing about this, I guess I'm going to talk about it a little bit, is it's a vital issue right now today. Can the president remove appointees who have been approved by the Senate from their office? And Johnson said, yes, I can. Donald Trump says, yes, I can. So that's an interesting thing. A lot of times, there's a lot of historians who say we should be relating events, past events, to current events, and so on. So I'll do some of that about Reconstruction. Then we're going to look at the presidential election of 1868. Grant had a spectacular early life, and we've spent a lot of time. We haven't even talked about the presidency yet. And this is where Grant gains the presidency. And the class is called Presidential History. but we talk about their whole lives. So here I am, basically halfway through my slides, and we're finally getting to Grant's presidency, which is pretty spectacular in and of itself. And we'll talk about the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, who their nominees are, what their concerns were. We'll talk about the election, and and then we're going to talk about the presidency general. Uh, um, Grant wins a big victory in terms of the number of votes that he gets. So I have some charts that show the biggest wins for presidents in U.S. history, and we'll take a look at some of that.
So we do have a few more questions here that we'll get through before we wrap up. Um, the first is, did Grant's terms of surrender comply with Lincoln's terms of surrender?
Oh, that I'm really not super familiar with what Lincoln wanted. But I can say that he was very close to what Johnson was talking about. You know, he wanted the South back in. He wanted them to be made citizens, and a lot of people want the radical Republicans who were a part of Lincoln's Republican Party. They wanted the South treated very harshly. Lincoln said, no, we're just going to let people back in. And Johnson wanted harsher treatment than what the South got, as Lincoln didn't want. That's about it for what I know about it. It's Lincoln is really a lot of the stuff about Lincoln and the Civil War just isn't what I'd call accurate, you know. I mean, he did eventually get on the uh, ending slavery bandwagon, but wasn't the reason he was fighting the Civil War.
Yeah.
That was for the preservation of the Union. And you preserve the Union by you bring these states back in and give them full rights. You know.
So then the last question we have for today is, I think if I'm understanding this right, is asking about the feelings of these areas of battle where the Confederacy may have won. When Reconstruction came around, did they keep those, bad feelings toward the Union, and sort of have those memories of the Civil War stirred up?
Uh, in the 1960s, when I was in college, a lot of people would talk about the South as they're still pissed off about the Civil War. And it's what much of the anti-rights movement stuff, Ku Klux Klan, all that, no rights for blacks, and was about. This continued for a century beyond the Civil War. And finally, I mean, the Mississippi Summer Project was students going down to Mississippi during the summer to register black voters, which weren't allowed to vote in Mississippi in the 1963 when this occurred. And there was great tension, and they were given literacy tests. Finally, 1965, Lyndon Johnson gets Congress to outlaw literacy tests. And it didn't just mean you could read and write. It meant you were asked questions about the Constitution and had to interpret what they meant. You know, this is in my lifetime. Most of the people in this class remember this. You were adults at the time. And well, a lot of people were still fighting this battle, they say, especially with immigrants, even immigrants that have rightful status. They've obeyed U.S. laws, become citizens, etc. But there's lots of talk about that. Um, so anyway, it's been difficult
Yep.
and for a long time.
Yeah, still an ongoing battle for a lot of different reasons. Well, that's all the time we have for today. It's 2 o'clock, so we will reconvene next Wednesday for session 4 of Ulysses S. Grant.